At 2300 hours on December 11, 1944, Corporal James Mackenzie crouched behind a shattered concrete seawall on the Ormoc waterfront and stared into the darkness of the bay. Three shadows were moving across black water. He was 32 years old, 2 months in combat, zero experience fighting warships. The 77th Infantry Division was not supposed to be engaging the Imperial Japanese Navy. But the 77th had stopped doing what they were supposed to do months ago. They were the oldest infantry division in the U.S. Army, average age 32. Accountants, taxi drivers, factory workers. The younger divisions called them the old bastards. The Japanese called them something far less polite. Across the Pacific War, American forces had killed roughly 2 million Japanese troops and captured about 50,000. A capture rate of just over 2%. The 77th Infantry Division had killed 43,385 enemy soldiers and taken only 358 prisoners, less than 1%. On Leyte alone, in 6 brutal weeks, they had killed nearly 20,000 Japanese troops. They did not negotiate with defensive lines. They erased them. Major General Andrew D. Bruce commanded the division, 49 years old, career artillery officer. A man who believed war could be reduced to equations, mass, velocity, and firepower. He had landed the 77th at Deposito Beach on December 7th, 3.5 miles south of Ormoc. The Japanese had expected Americans to claw through the mountains from the east. Bruce gave them 72 hours to understand their error. By December 10th, Ormoc was American. The town lay in rubble. Campdowns burned. The Antioch River had run red for 3 days. And still, the Japanese kept coming. Every night, barges and small transports slipped past U.S. naval patrols, hugging the coastline to deliver reinforcements to the mountains north of Ormoc. General Tomoyuki Yamashita had committed to making Leyte the decisive battle of the Philippines. Without reinforcements, his defensive line would collapse. The Americans needed to stop those reinforcements. Officially, that was the Navy's job. Destroyers patrolled offshore. PT boats hunted in shallow water. Army infantry divisions were not equipped to duel ships. But the 77th had something unusual along the waterfront. 3 M10 tank destroyers from the 3-inch gun motor carriage battalions. The M10 was built to kill German armor in Europe. 17 tons. Open-top turret. A 3-inch gun capable of penetrating 3 inches of hardened steel at 1,000 yards. Against a Tiger tank, it was lethal. Against a landing ship, nobody knew. At 23:55, Mackenzie checked his watch. 5 minutes to midnight. The lead silhouette was growing larger, roughly the size of an LST, perhaps a Japanese No. 101 class landing ship. It moved slowly toward a stretch of beach northwest of town where Japanese troops still held the hills. If that ship unloaded, another week of fighting would follow. 20 minutes earlier, the M10 crews had received simple orders. Track the vessels. Wait for illumination. Fire on command. No one knew whether armor-piercing shells would punch through a transport hull. No one knew if the ships would return fire. No one knew if this would work. At exactly midnight, a 60mm mortar round arced upward from 200 yards inland. It climbed 300 feet, then burst. White phosphorus flooded Ormoc Bay in ghostly daylight. Transport number 159 stood fully exposed, approximately 200 feet long, 800 tons displacement, already grinding onto sand. Ramps dropped at bow and stern. Dark figures streamed down into white surf. Equipment rolled behind them. They were unloading tanks. The flare would burn for 30 seconds. 30 seconds to acquire. Calculate. Load. Fire. The lead M10 fired first. A 3-inch armor-piercing shell left the muzzle at 2,600 feet per second. Recoil drove the chassis backward 6 inches. The projectile crossed the bay in just over 1 second. Direct hit. The shell struck the transport just above the waterline, punched through plating less than an inch thick, tore through the cargo hold, and detonated against the far bulkhead. A hole the size of a truck ripped open in the hull. Water flooded in immediately. The ship listed 7 degrees to starboard. Troops on the ramps froze. Men inside the hold scrambled. The flare burned out. Darkness returned. 40 seconds later, another illumination round burst overhead. The ship was lower in the water now, stern settling, cargo hold flooding. The M10 fired again. Second hit, below the waterline aft. Now the flooding exceeded any pumping capacity. Transport number 159 was dying. But 4 more vessels were approaching from the north. 3 barges. 1 larger transport. Under flare light, their silhouettes were unmistakable. The Japanese captains could see the first ship sinking. They also had orders. Retreat was not a word used in the Imperial Japanese Army. They kept coming. Along the waterfront, the 7th Anti-Aircraft Battalion rolled 40mm Bofors into position and depressed their barrels for surface fire. Infantrymen fed belts into 50 caliber machine guns. Mortar teams prepared fresh illumination rounds. The third flare burst overhead. A second transport was now 600 yards from shore. Behind the lines, General Bruce watched from a command post 300 yards inland. There was no doctrine for this at Fort Sill. No manual chapter titled Infantry Division versus Enemy Naval Reinforcement. But the old bastards had stopped waiting for doctrine months ago. At 0:15, the order came down. Fire at will. Ormoc Bay exploded in light and recoil. 40mm anti-aircraft guns hammered surface targets. 50 caliber machine guns raked troop barges. Self-propelled howitzers from the 307th Infantry pumped high-explosive rounds into approaching hulls. And 3 M10 tank destroyers fired armor-piercing shells, designed to kill Panthers and Tigers, at ships designed to carry men. The 77th Infantry Division was about to fight the Japanese Navy from a concrete seawall. And nobody on either side had ever seen anything like it. The math was cruel, and it favored the Americans. The Japanese ships had no armor worth mentioning, no real guns for a duel, and almost no room to maneuver in the shallow bowl of Ormoc Bay. They were cargo haulers doing one job: deliver men to shore, while an entire waterfront had been turned into a prepared firing line. At 0:16, the second transport took the opening blow. An M10's 3-inch round punched through the bow and tore into the forward hold. The shell detonated inside a packed compartment of troops staged for landing, and for a fraction of a second the ship's silhouette flickered, an interior flash, a bloom of fragments, bodies thrown against steel. An estimated 40 soldiers died before they even understood they were under direct fire. The transport did not turn away. Discipline held. The captain kept the nose pointed at the beach and forced the ship forward like it could bully its way through physics. Then the self-propelled howitzers spoke. 105mm high-explosive rounds were not built to penetrate the way an armor-piercing shell did. They were built to erase. Overpressure, fragmentation, steel torn open by concussion. The first shell slammed into the superstructure and blew it apart in a cloud of splintered plating. The second hit the deck and turned the troop staging area into a wrecked metal ramp. The third struck near the waterline and opened the hull like a lid peeled back. The ship lurched forward another 200 yards before the flooding became fatal. The captain made the only decision left: run it aground. He drove it into the shallows and stopped it hard, for 100 yards from shore. Too far to wade safely, too shallow to float free, perfectly trapped. Men jumped anyway. Some hit water over their heads and vanished immediately. Others thrashed, boots and packs dragging them down. A few strong swimmers turned toward the beach and started the long, impossible crossing. On the seawall, American gunners tracked them through flare light and smoke as if they were targets on a training range. By 0:20, transport number 159 was gone, fully submerged except for a piece of superstructure jutting above the water like a broken tooth. Roughly 150 Japanese troops had reached land before it sank. Around 200 were still in the bay. The rest went down with the ship. On the American side, estimates formed fast and ugly. 300 casualties from that vessel alone. The barges were next, smaller, quicker, drawing less water. Each carried around 50 men. Their captains tried to split the incoming fire by scattering, hoping to force the shoreline guns into indecision. It was the right idea. It still failed. The 7th Anti-Aircraft Battalion had 6 40mm Bofors lined along the waterfront with barrels depressed for surface fire. Each gun could hammer out about 120 rounds per minute. The barges were well inside effective range. At 0:22, the Bofors opened up. The first barge didn't sink so much as cease being a boat. 40mm shells detonated on impact, and when explosive rounds hit a wooden craft in rapid succession, It comes apart like thin lumber under a sledge. The barge became floating wreckage and debris in seconds. In the water afterward, fewer than 10 survivors could be seen moving. The second barge tried to turn away, rudder hard over, nose swinging toward deeper water. The M10 crews tracked the Ark cleanly. At 0:24, a 3-inch armor-piercing round hit amidships and split the craft into 2 broken halves. Both sections sank in under half a minute. Troops hit the water in an oil-slicked boil. Machine gun fire found them there. The third barge made the closest attempt. The captain drove it straight at the beach at maximum throttle, ignoring everything coming at him. 50 caliber rounds punched through the hull. Mortar bursts through water columns around the craft. It grounded in 3 feet of water 70 yards from shore. Men poured over the sides and started running, wading, stumbling, fighting current and panic. They made it 15 yards. Then the shoreline guns cut them down. The 77th had arranged interlocking fields of fire across every approach to the waterfront. The Japanese troops stepped into a killing zone with no cover, no smoke screen, and no supporting fire. They died in water so shallow they could see the sand beneath them. All 50. The first engagement lasted 18 minutes. 5 Japanese vessels attempted a landing. 5 were destroyed. Estimated enemy losses, roughly 750 troops. American losses, none. But the Bay was still listening. Radio intercept teams were already reporting more vessels forming up to the north. General Bruce received a rapid after-action summary at 0:40. 5 ships destroyed, 750 enemy casualties estimated, 0 American casualties. Ammunition expenditure was almost absurd in its simplicity. One M10 fired 7 rounds, another 5, the third only 3. 15 armor-piercing shells total. The howitzers had fired 42 rounds. The 40mm guns had burned through roughly 600 shells combined. Bruce didn't need drama. He needed numbers. The conclusion was immediate. As long as the 77th held that waterfront, Ormoc Bay was closed to Japanese reinforcement by sea. Any ship that tried would be lit, ranged, and cut apart. Any soldier who tried to swim ashore would die in the water. Bruce sent his report up to Ziv Corps, brief, cold, and perfectly clear. Enemy attempted reinforcement into Ormoc Bay. 5 vessels destroyed. Request air reconnaissance at first light to confirm kills. The Corps commander reportedly reread it twice before it sounded real. The implications went beyond one night. Ormoc was the last major port on Leyte's western coast still usable for reinforcement runs. Yamashita had been feeding men and supplies through the bay since late October despite devastating losses to American air and naval interdiction. Between November 9th and December 11th, Japanese forces had attempted repeated convoy efforts, landing roughly 34,000 troops while losing large numbers of transports and escorts. Naval historians would later label the Ormoc Bay fights among the most savage, grinding naval air interdiction campaigns of the Pacific. And now, the 77th Infantry Division, an infantry unit, had added something new, a shore-based trap that even the Imperial Japanese Navy could not force. The Japanese tried again on the night of December 12th. 2 barges approached at 2200 hours. Illumination flares caught them at 800 yards. The M10s destroyed both before they could close inside 500. Estimated enemy losses, 100 troops. American losses, 0. They tried again on December 13th, 1 larger transport with escort barges. The transport was heavier than number 159, perhaps around 900 tons, carrying roughly 400 troops and equipment. The American guns sank it in 12 minutes. The escorts never got inside 1,000 yards. Estimated losses, 550 troops. American losses, 0. After December 13th, Yamashita stopped sending reinforcements into Ormoc. The numbers had turned suicidal. Roughly 1,300 troops lost in 3 nights for positions the 77th was dismantling during daylight. The remaining Japanese units in the mountains were now cut off from resupply and reinforcement. They would keep fighting, but they would fight without help. On December 14th, the 77th pushed north out of Ormoc. The 307th Infantry Regiment led the advance into the hills, moving toward the destruction of what remained of the Japanese ground force on Leyte. The division moved through towns and junctions as the resistance fractured, and by December 25th, Christmas Day, the island was effectively secured through link-up. The campaign statistics would later look clinical. Tens of thousands of enemy killed, a tiny number captured, American losses measured in hundreds. But the numbers did not naturally include what happened on the water on the night of December 11th, because what happened there wasn't supposed to be possible. In January 1945, the U.S. Army opened an official investigation for one reason. Had an infantry division truly sunk enemy ships with tank destroyers? To confirm it, they would need proof, wreckage reports, aerial reconnaissance, witness statements, because modern war had no category for what the 77th had just done. Tanks were not supposed to fight ships. Tank destroyers were not supposed to duel naval transports. The M10 had been designed to kill armored vehicles, Panthers, Tigers, self-propelled guns, not sink 800-ton landing ships in a tropical bay. But Ormoc Bay did not care what the manual said. In January 1945, an official investigation team arrived to confirm what sounded impossible. Low tide exposed twisted steel in the shallows. Navy divers went into the deeper sections of the bay. Transport number 159 lay in 15 feet of water. The hull showed 2 clean penetration points on the starboard side. Investigators measured them carefully, 3 inches in diameter, below the waterline. The entry angles matched the shoreline firing positions. The flooding pattern matched the timeline recorded in the after-action reports. The vessel had taken fatal damage exactly where the M10 crews said they had aimed. The second transport lay farther out, but was still reachable. Divers documented 3 penetrations, 2 from 3-inch armor-piercing rounds, 1 from a 105mm high-explosive shell. The 3-inch rounds had entered starboard and exited port, punching completely through the hull before detonating internally. Fragments recovered from the seabed were cataloged and shipped for analysis. Metallurgical examination confirmed the steel composition and manufacturing signature. U.S. 3-inch armor-piercing rounds produced in 1944 at Watervliet Arsenal, New York. The conclusion was unambiguous. The 77th Infantry Division had sunk multiple Japanese naval vessels using M10 tank destroyers firing from shore. The report included a statement that quietly placed the engagement into history. This was the only confirmed instance in World War II of armored fighting vehicles engaging and destroying enemy warships. Not in the Pacific. Not in Europe. Nowhere. The Germans had never done it. The Soviets had never done it. The British had never done it. The Japanese had never done it. Only the 77th Infantry Division had turned tank destroyers into coastal artillery and used them to sink ships attempting amphibious reinforcement. In March 1945, the U.S. Army quietly updated the M10 Tactical Manual. A new section appeared, Employment against Naval Targets. 3 paragraphs. It noted that 3-inch armor-piercing rounds could penetrate unarmored vessels at ranges up to 1,000 yards. It recommended aiming at or just below the waterline to maximize flooding. It cited Ormoc Bay as the reference case. The update was largely theoretical. The opportunity never came again. After Leyte, the Japanese ceased large-scale reinforcement attempts under American-controlled shorelines. The island-hopping campaign moved to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where defenders were already entrenched before U.S. forces arrived. No other tank destroyer would ever fire on a warship in the war. The M10 crews who sank transport number 159 received no special medals, no naval citations, no recognition for sinking ships. It was recorded as part of the routine defense of Ormoc. They went back to fighting infantry and fortifications. General Andrew D. Bruce mentioned the incident only once in his memoirs. He described it not as a miracle or innovation, but as an example of flexibility. The defining trait of the division, he wrote, was the willingness to employ any weapon against any target if it increased the efficiency of killing the enemy. The old bastards did not ask whether a weapon was designed for the task. They asked whether it would work. The M10s remained with the division through Okinawa. They destroyed pillboxes, knocked out artillery, supported infantry assaults exactly as doctrine intended. But they never sank another ship. By war's end, December 11th had become just another entry in a long ledger of engagements. The 77th had fought through 3 major campaigns: Guam, Leyte, Okinawa. They had killed more than 43,000 enemy soldiers. They had lost more than 2,000 of their own. 5 ships sunk in 18 minutes was extraordinary. But in a year of continuous combat, it was simply one more night. The 77th Infantry Division had not been formed as an elite unit. When it reactivated in March 1942, the War Department expected it to be standard issue, another infantry formation to feed into the Pacific War. Its ranks were filled with civilians from New York and New Jersey. Average age, 32. Older than most infantry divisions. Many had families, careers, businesses. They were reservists called back into uniform. The Army called them a reserve formation. Other units called them the Old Bastards. They trained at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for 14 months. Nothing exotic. Standard infantry drills. Amphibious practice. Jungle warfare instruction. Weapons qualification. They passed everything. By June 1943, they were combat ready. General Bruce took command in May 1943. He was 47, older than many division commanders, and an artillery officer by trade. He studied his division carefully. He did not see speed. He saw discipline. These men would never outrun younger Marines in the jungle. But they could think before acting. They could conserve strength. They could follow fire plans precisely. Bruce emphasized firepower over heroics. Maneuver over frontal assault. Artillery before bayonets. The Old Bastards learned to surround strong points rather than charge them. They learned to let heavy weapons do the work. They learned to preserve manpower while destroying the enemy methodically. They deployed to Hawaii in March 1944 and continued amphibious and jungle training. Still the oldest infantry division in the Army. Still underestimated. They landed on Guam on July 21, 1944. Initial resistance was light. The Japanese had concentrated elsewhere. But inland, the real fight began. Caves, machine guns, artillery observers hidden in jungle canopy. Bruce's doctrine worked. The 77th encircled positions, called artillery, waited, then cleared survivors. They did not waste men on dramatic charges. By August 8, Guam was secure. The casualty ratios favored the Americans heavily. The division's after-action report emphasized 2 factors: fire discipline and tactical patience. Translation: they thought before they shot, and they maneuvered before they attacked. After Guam, the division was supposed to refit. Instead, they were redirected to Leyte. They landed on November 23, 1944, Thanksgiving Day. No rest. No break. Straight back into combat. 2 weeks of rear area patrols ended when Bruce received orders for an amphibious assault on the western coast of Leyte. Seize Ormoc. Cut off reinforcements. The division loaded on December 6th. Landed at Deposito Beach on December 7th. Captured Ormoc on December 10th. On the night of December 11th, they sank 5 Japanese vessels trying to reinforce the garrison. 18 minutes. Everything Bruce had taught them was visible in that engagement. Use the correct weapon for the target. Concentrate firepower. Eliminate the threat efficiently. Take no unnecessary risks. The M10 crews had never trained to fight ships. They did not need to. They understood the only principle that mattered. Put rounds on target until the target stops being a threat. That principle carried the 77th Infantry Division through Leyte and beyond it. The campaign ended on February 5, 1945. Final numbers were cold and precise. 19,456 enemy killed, 124 captured, 543 Americans dead, 1,469 wounded. The Japanese 35th Army ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. General Tomoyuki Yamashita abandoned his plan to make Leyte the decisive battle of the Philippines. The Americans owned the island. The Old Bastards had 60 days before the next fight. They used them the only way soldiers at war know how: replacing the dead, repairing the broken, training the new. The M10 tank destroyers that had fired into Ormoc Bay received fresh barrels. Tracks were replaced. Engines were tuned. Crews instructed replacements on loading drills, range estimation, and survival under fire. Nobody added a lesson plan on sinking ships. That lesson had already been written in blood and steel. Everyone knew Okinawa would be worse. Leyte had been brutal. Okinawa would be apocalyptic. The 77th landed on the Karama-Reto Islands west of Okinawa on March 26, 1945. Those small islands had to be cleared before the main invasion. The fighting lasted 5 days. American casualties, 27 killed, 81 wounded. Japanese casualties, more than 650 dead or captured. The math remained consistent. The main invasion of Okinawa began April 1st. The 77th was initially held in reserve. They landed on Ie Shima on April 16th, an island with a critical airfield the Americans needed. The Japanese had fortified every cave and ridgeline. Combat was close. Flamethrowers burned bunker mouths. Artillery shattered hillsides. Hand grenades rolled into tunnels where fighting turned intimate and vicious. On April 18th, war correspondent Ernie Pyle was shot and killed by a Japanese machine gunner while moving with a reconnaissance patrol. He had been living with the 77th for weeks. He liked them. He wrote about them with admiration. The division erected a simple marker where he fell. On this spot, the 77th Division lost a buddy. Ie Shima fell on April 21st. The 77th moved on to Okinawa proper on April 25th, relieving exhausted units on the southern front. There, the terrain turned savage. The Japanese defensive lines stretched across the island in a system of fortified caves and reverse-slope artillery positions invisible to naval bombardment. The escarpments were nearly vertical in places. Ladders and cargo nets were required to climb into machine gun fire. The 77th attacked on April 28th. They did not charge blindly. They did what Bruce had trained them to do. Artillery first. Suppress. Flank. Seal caves. Advance when the enemy was broken. They fought ridge by ridge toward Shuri, coordinating with Marine units. By May 31st, they occupied the ruins. The Japanese had already withdrawn farther south for a final stand. Through June, the division continued its slow, grinding advance, cave by cave, hill by hill. Then it was over. In July, the 77th returned to the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan. They never made it. The atomic bombs fell in August. Japan surrendered on August 15th. Instead of invading the home islands, the 77th occupied Hokkaido. No combat. No artillery. No night flares. Their last battle had been on Okinawa. The division was deactivated on March 15, 1946. Final World War II totals. Approximately 44,000 enemy killed. 488 prisoners captured. 2,140 Americans killed in action. More than 7,000 wounded. 200 days of sustained combat. The capture rate remained under 1%, the lowest in the Pacific. The old bastards had lived up to their reputation. Most of them went home. 2,140 did not. Their names are carved into stone across Guam, Leyte, and Okinawa. Men considered too old for infantry combat, who fought anyway. The night of December 11th became a footnote in official histories. But the men who were there remembered. The last surviving crew member from the M10 that sank transport number 159 died in 2003. His name was Robert Henderson. He was 84. He never spoke publicly about Ormoc Bay. When family asked about the war, he answered simply, "I did my job and came home." After his death, his grandson found his service records, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, campaign ribbons for Guam, Leyte, Okinawa, and a citation referencing engagement of enemy naval vessels with tank destroyer fire. The grandson had never heard that story. Most of the old bastards never told theirs. They came home in 1946 and went back to Manhattan taxis, Brooklyn accounting offices, Jersey City factory floors. They built families, paid mortgages, raised children. They survived the war. They did not relive it. The division reunions were held in New York for decades. The Old Bastards Club met on East 39th Street. They toasted the 2,140 who never returned. They spoke of Guam, Leyte, Okinawa in a language their families rarely heard. But even there, the sinking of ships was just another engagement. 15 rounds fired. 5 vessels destroyed. Then, on to the next mission. Only decades later did military historians circle back to Ormoc Bay. They realized its uniqueness. Armored fighting vehicles engaging and destroying enemy naval vessels from shore positions. It had happened once. Only once. Never before. Never again. Papers were written. Analyses published. Tactical flexibility cited as the lesson. But no analysis captured the feeling of that night. The flare light turning darkness into white noon. The silhouettes of ships caught in crosshairs. The splash of men in black water. The certainty that this was the job. The 77th Infantry Division was never meant to be elite. They were older, slower, civilians in uniform. But they killed 44,000 enemy soldiers because they understood a principle that required no manual. Use every weapon available. Maximize firepower. Minimize risk. Complete the mission. The M10 tank destroyer had been built to kill German armor in Europe. The 77th used it to sink Japanese ships in the Philippines. No doctrine required it. No one trained them for it. But when transport no. 159 tried to land troops at Ormoc, they put rounds through the hull until it sank. 80 years later, the M10s are scrap. The ships lie under 15 feet of water and decades of silt in Ormoc Bay. The men are gone. The reports gather dust in archives. But on the night of December 11, 1944, American tank destroyers sank Japanese ships from shore. It happened once, and it never happened again.